All right, so let's dive into something that I think impacts way too many of us, and that is migraines. Today we're going to be exploring this really interesting possibility of predicting migraines, and this is all based on some new research from an article called "Hey Hi." Oh, could. So that's causes and prediction of morning headaches for those of us who don't speak Korean. And this article also has this really interesting story about a software engineer, Katyani Vajpayee. And she's someone who has experienced migraines during just major life events, like even her wedding day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You know, that really just highlights the need for reliable prediction methods for these things. Because, migraines, they're not just a bad headache. We're talking intense throbbing pain, often on one side of the head, and so often they strike in the morning. And when you consider that at least 1 in 10 people globally experience migraines, and women and lower-income individuals are disproportionately affected.
Yeah.
It really makes finding some answers here all the more urgent.
That's a huge number of people.
Yeah.
But if researchers are still trying to figure out, the root cause of migraines, how can we even begin to predict them?
Well, that's where this new research published in Neurology comes in. They had 477 volunteers in Washington, D.C., and they used a smartphone app to track moods, sleep, energy levels, stress, and headaches for 2 weeks. And what they found is especially intriguing for those who experience those morning migraines, like Katyani.
Okay, I'm all ears. So what kind of sleep disruptions are we talking about here? Is it just the amount of sleep someone gets, or is it the quality of sleep?
Well, it seems like both poor sleep quality and lower energy levels the day before, those were very strongly associated with morning migraines. Interestingly enough, that connection didn't really hold true for headaches that occurred later in the day.
So the timing of the headache really seems to be crucial here. What about those afternoon or evening headaches? Did the study find any connections there?
This is where it gets pretty interesting. They actually found a link to higher stress levels or higher energy the previous day for those later headaches.
Now, that seems kind of counterintuitive. Why would high energy be linked to a migraine? Is it possible that high energy is actually part of the prodrome phase? So those early warning signs that your body sends out before a migraine hits?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And it really speaks to just how complex this whole condition is. So, before the headache actually hits, you often have what we call the prodrome phase. And you have things like mood swings, sleep disturbances, and just other kind of unusual symptoms. And some people, they even experience aura. And these are neurological disturbances like visual distortions or dizziness. And those can happen before or during the headache. And then even after the headache subsides, there's this kind of migraine hangover they call the postdrome phase. And it's marked by, fatigue, difficulty, concentrating, just this overall weakness.
So it's kind of I don't know if you've ever had this, but after you have a really, really bad night's sleep, you stayed up way too late and then you finally do get to sleep, but then you wake up and you actually feel like you have more energy. It's that kind of thing almost.
Yeah.
It's your body's oh, no, we got to go.
Yeah, you're running on fumes, basically.
Exactly. And then it's you said, you have that crash later.
Right.
So it's maybe it's the same kind of thing here with a migraine.
Exactly. And then to complicate things even further, there's this question of whether sleep problems are a cause of migraines or if they're an early symptom. The article even points out how migraines themselves can disrupt sleep, which then creates this vicious cycle.
So if the researchers were doing all this tracking with the smartphone app, could they differentiate between sleep disruption as a trigger versus sleep disruption as a symptom of a migraine?
Well, while the study did identify these associations, it doesn't completely untangle that cause and effect relationship. And that's something that researchers are really still trying to fully understand. But they are using tools like EEG monitoring to try to get a clearer picture of what's happening in the brain during these different phases of a migraine.
It seems like there is still so much we don't know. But for someone who's living with migraines, what's the key takeaway from this research? Is it possible to gain some predictability and control over something that often feels so random?
Yeah, that's what so many people are wondering. And while it's not about eliminating every single migraine, this research does suggest that tracking those key factors like sleep, energy, stress, that can provide some really valuable insights into your own personal migraine patterns.
That makes sense. But isn't that a lot for someone to be track of? I mean, how realistic is it for someone to just be constantly logging, every little detail of their day? Would it be more helpful to focus on specific types of sleep tracking or stress management techniques? Or are we talking about just a more general awareness of these factors?
That's a valid point, It really is about finding that balance between awareness and just feeling completely overloaded. And that's where I think professional guidance can be really helpful. Working with a healthcare provider can help you make sense of all this data. They can identify any red flags and help you develop a personalized management strategy that fits into your life.
So it's not just about looking at the research and saying, okay, I'm going to do this. It's about taking this research and then having a more informed conversation with your doctor.
Exactly. And while we've been talking a lot about the sleep-migraine connection, there is another really fascinating part of this study that I think we should discuss next. Do you remember how we were talking about that counterintuitive finding, that higher energy could actually precede those afternoon or evening headaches?
Oh, yeah. That really caught my attention. It just seems so strange, like our bodies are sending these mixed signals. If poor sleep and low energy, it signals a morning migraine. Why would high energy, which you think would be a good thing, be linked to a headache later in the day?
Yeah, it definitely challenges our assumptions, right? And while the study doesn't give us a definitive answer, it does suggest that there might be different underlying mechanisms at play, depending on the time of day that a migraine actually hits. So maybe for some people, a surge in energy is actually their body's way of overcompensating for an impending migraine. It's like this last burst of activity before a storm hits.
So almost like our internal energy systems are just completely thrown off in the lead up to a migraine.
Uh-huh.
And it can kind of manifest in different ways depending on the person and the timing.
Precisely. And that's why I think this idea of personalized tracking is so important. It's not just about looking at these factors individually, it's about understanding how they all interact for you in the context of your migraines.
It's like being a data detective for your own health.
Mm-hmm.
But if everyone's triggers are unique, is there anything in the article that offers more general advice? Beyond just meticulously tracking everything? Like, Katyani from the article, she mentioned wishing that she could just see her migraines coming. So what can she and others like her do to try to gain that foresight?
Well, the article really emphasizes the importance of just overall lifestyle regularity. So that means things like maintaining consistent meal times, making sure you're staying adequately hydrated, not just focusing on sleep. It's really about minimizing those drastic fluctuations in your routine because those can be contributing to migraine episodes.
So it's kind of like creating this stable foundation for your body, almost like training your body to run like a well-oiled machine.
Yeah. I like that analogy. It's about reducing the noise in your system so you can more easily pick out those signals that are relevant to your migraines.
That makes sense. Now, what about exercise? Does the article touch on that at all? I've heard that can be helpful for managing migraines.
Oh, absolutely. The article highlights the benefits of regular physical activity because, exercise helps regulate those stress hormones we were talking about. It can improve sleep quality and it boosts endorphins. And all of those things can really contribute to preventing migraines.
Right. So it's not just about being reactive and like trying to manage the pain when a migraine hits. It's about proactively building up that resilience and potentially reducing how often you even get them.
Exactly. And while it's important to note that, this research is just one piece of a much larger puzzle, it really does offer us a promising starting point.
I agree. But what about those other pieces of the puzzle? If this study focused mainly on sleep, stress, and energy levels, what are some of the other factors that people might want to pay attention to when it comes to their migraines?
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting. Because beyond those core factors, the article really suggests that the key is to become really attuned to your individual triggers.
So going beyond just the research and really doing some self-exploration, what are some examples of those more personalized triggers?
Well, it's going to be different for everybody. But some common culprits are certain foods, how much caffeine or alcohol you're taking in, changes in the weather, hormonal fluctuations, even strong scents or bright lights can be triggers for some people.
Wow, it's almost like creating this personalized migraine map, charting out those danger zones.
Exactly. And keeping a headache diary can be so helpful for this. Write down not just when you get a migraine, but what you ate that day, how you slept the night before, your stress levels, any unusual weather changes, really anything that you think might be relevant. And then over time, those patterns are going to start to emerge.
It's like, you're connecting those seemingly random dots and you're uncovering those hidden triggers that might have been right there in front of you the whole time. But with all of this to keep in mind, how can someone avoid just feeling totally overwhelmed?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a process of discovery. It's not about gathering every single piece of data. Start by focusing on those core factors from the study, the sleep, stress, energy, and then gradually expand your investigation as needed. And the most important thing is don't go it alone.
Right. Involve your doctor.
Exactly. They can help you make sense of your own personal migraine map. and guide you towards those management strategies that are going to be most effective for you.
So working together as a team to really create this personalized action plan.
Exactly.
We've covered a lot of ground so far today. We talked about this potential for predicting migraines, the importance of understanding those individual triggers, and even strategies for managing those times when a migraine does take hold.
Yeah. And it's important to remember that while we've talked about a lot today, this is really just the beginning.
Right. It's a starting point. So use this knowledge to continue learning and talking with your healthcare provider.
Exactly. Knowledge is power when it comes to migraines. The more you understand, the better equipped you'll be to really navigate this challenging condition.
Very well said. Today we've learned about the different phases of a migraine. We've explored those potential triggers like poor sleep, high stress, fluctuating energy levels.
Yeah.
And we've emphasized how important it is to do that individualized tracking, work with your healthcare providers, and build those healthy habits, because those are really the foundation of managing your migraines.
And don't forget those practical tips for managing those times when a migraine hits. Early intervention is key.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this journey of knowledge and discovery. We hope you feel empowered to take control of your migraine experience and work towards a more migraine-free life.
Until next time, stay curious and take care. Going back to what we were talking about before, that counterintuitive finding that higher energy could actually be a sign that an afternoon or evening headache is coming.
Right. Yeah, that really stood out to me. Just seems so backwards. Like if poor sleep and low energy signal a morning migraine coming, why would high energy, which seems like it should be a good thing, be linked to a headache later in the day?
Yeah, it definitely goes against what you'd expect. Now, while the study doesn't give us a clear-cut answer here, it does kind of hint at the idea that there could be different things going on under the surface, depending on whether a migraine hits in the morning or later in the day. So it might be that for some people, this surge in energy is actually their body's way of trying to compensate for a migraine that's about to hit. Kind of like, a last burst of energy before a big storm.
So it's like our bodies are trying to fight the migraine, but it actually ends up backfiring.
Exactly. And I think that's another reason why this whole idea of personalized tracking is so important, because it's not just about looking at these factors like sleep and energy in isolation. It's about figuring out how they all work together in your body and how they relate to your personal experience with migraines.
So almost like you're putting together the pieces of a puzzle. But if everyone has their own unique triggers, are there any general tips that the article offers, besides just keeping track of everything? We were talking about Katiani before and how she wished she could just tell when a migraine was coming. What can she and other people who get migraines do to kind of get a heads up?
Well, one thing the article really stresses is the importance of having a regular lifestyle. And that means things like trying to eat your meals at around the same time every day, making sure you're drinking enough water. It's not just about sleep, it's about trying to avoid those big ups and downs in your daily routine, because that can actually make migraines worse.
So it's like you're trying to create a solid routine so your body knows what to expect.
Right. You want to minimize the chaos in your system so that you can more easily see the signals that are specific to your migraines.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, what about exercise? Does the article talk about that at all? I've heard that exercise can be helpful for people who get migraines.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
The article talks about how important regular physical activity is, because exercise helps regulate those stress hormones we were discussing earlier. It can also improve your sleep quality. And it releases endorphins, all of which can help prevent migraines.
So you're not just waiting for a migraine to hit and then trying to deal with the pain. You're trying to prevent them from happening in the first place.
Exactly. You're building up your defenses.
Now, it's important to remember that this research is just one piece of a very complex puzzle.
Right.
But it's definitely a good place to start.
Absolutely.
So what about those other pieces of the puzzle? If the study mainly focused on sleep, stress, and energy levels, are there any other things that people should be aware of when it comes to their migraines?
That's where things get really interesting. Because beyond those core factors, the article suggests that the most important thing is to become aware of your individual triggers.
So not just relying on the research, but really paying attention to what's happening in your own body.
Right.
What are some examples of those personalized triggers?
Well, everyone's different, of course. But some common ones are certain foods, how much caffeine you drink, how much alcohol you drink, changes in the weather, hormonal changes. Even strong smells or bright lights can trigger migraines in some people.
So there are a lot of possibilities.
There are?
It's almost like you're creating a map of your own personal migraine triggers.
Exact.
Now, the article mentions keeping a headache diary.
Right.
How can that help?
Well, whenever you get a migraine, write down not just when it happened, but also what you ate that day, how well you slept the night before, how stressed you were feeling, whether there were any unusual changes in the weather, basically anything that you think might be related. And if you do that for a while, you'll start to see patterns.
So you're basically playing detective to try to figure out what your triggers are.
Exactly.
But with all of this to keep in mind, it seems like it could be easy to get overwhelmed.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So where should someone start?
Well, it's a process. You don't have to figure everything out at once. Start by focusing on those key factors from the sleep, stress, and energy, and then you can gradually start to look at other things. And most importantly, don't try to do it all on your own.
Right, talk to your doctor.
Exactly. They can help you understand what's going on and come up with a plan that works for you.
So it's about having a good team.
Exactly.
You know, we've covered a lot of ground today. We talked about how it might be possible to predict migraines. We talked about how important it is to understand your own triggers. And we even talked about some things you can do to manage migraine when it hits.
And you know, it's important to remember that this is just the beginning of the conversation.
It is. This is a starting point. So use this information to keep learning and to talk to your doctor.
Exactly. The more you know about migraines, the better you'll be able to handle them.
That's so true. So today we've learned about the different phases of a migraine. We talked about some of those potential triggers like poor sleep, high stress, changes in energy levels. And we emphasized how important it is to track your own symptoms and triggers, to work with your healthcare providers, and to build healthy habits.
Right.
Those are the foundation for managing migraines.
And remember those tips for when a migraine does hit. Try to deal with it as early as possible.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you feel like you have more control over your migraines now and that you can start working towards a life with fewer migraines.
Until next time, take care.
Yeah. So we talked about, recognizing those early signs and maybe even predicting a migraine before it hits.
Right. But what about those times when, a migraine just shows up anyway? Is there anything in the article about managing a migraine once it's already started?
Well, the article really emphasizes the importance of intervening early. It's kind of like putting out a fire. The sooner you address it, the less damage it can do. So don't wait until the pain is just unbearable before you do something.
Exactly. If you notice those signs, whether it's from your tracking or those early symptoms you were talking about, act quickly. That could mean taking an over-the-counter pain reliever, or finding a quiet, dark place to rest, or even trying some relaxation techniques like deep breathing or meditation.
Those are all really good things to try. But what if those things aren't enough? When should someone talk to their doctor about their migraines?
It's definitely important to talk to your doctor, especially if your migraines are really frequent or severe, or if they're preventing you from doing the things you need to do in your daily life. They can work with you to come up with a treatment plan that addresses your specific needs and migraine patterns.
So what might that treatment plan include?
Well, it could involve a few different things. Your doctor might suggest prescription medications that are designed to prevent or treat migraines, or they might recommend alternative therapies like acupuncture or biofeedback. Or they might even suggest some lifestyle changes to help manage stress and improve your sleep habits.
So it really depends on the individual.
Yeah, it does. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to managing migraines. It's about figuring out your triggers, recognizing your symptoms, and working with your doctor to create a plan that helps you take control.
Well, this has been a really insightful deep dive. We've explored the potential of predicting migraines. We've talked about understanding individual triggers. And we've even discussed ways to manage migraines when they do happen.
And remember, this is just the beginning.
It is. It's a jumping off point.
Exactly.
So keep learning, keep talking to your healthcare provider.
Exactly. Knowledge is power when it comes to migraines. The more you know, the better you'll be able to handle them.
So well said. Today, we learned about the different phases of a migraine. We talked about potential triggers like poor sleep, high stress, those changing energy levels. And we really highlighted how important it is to track your own individual symptoms and triggers, to work with your healthcare providers, and to create those healthy habits that can help you manage your migraines.
And don't forget those practical tips for what to do when a migraine hits. Taking action early can make a big difference.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you feel empowered to take control of your migraine experience and work towards a life with fewer migraines.
Until next time, stay curious and take care.